Today I'm going to answer a commonly asked question. Can I keep my bank and brokerage accounts when I move outside of my country? It's incredibly complicated, but I'm going to give you some of the key points. Native Nomad asks, might be a dumb question, but when looking to renounce citizenship, would things like Webull, Robinhood, etc. go with you, or do you have to give those up and invest with regional stockbrokers? And so I'm going to talk about banks, I'm going to talk about brokerages, and answering that question. If it's your first time here, I'm Andrew Henderson, founder of Nomad Capitalist. We're a boutique consulting firm that helps 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs legally go where you're treated best. You can learn everything that entails at nomadcapitalist.com. We also host the biggest and best offshore conference called Nomad Capitalist Live. It's open to absolutely everybody. So, not tax advice, not financial advice in this video. Again, there's so many different countries. Right? We have lawyers and tax people all over the world that we work with for these different countries. We do holistic planning. So if you want to move from the U.S. to Portugal, for example, you got to figure out both the U.S. and Portugal side. And so it's really hard with so many different permutations, so many countries to answer in a straightforward way. But I'm going to give you at least some things to think about. Okay. The first thing is you want to be diversified long before you get to the point of what Native Nomad is asking about renouncing. So he's, I imagine, a U.S. citizen. Most other countries' citizens aren't renouncing their citizenship, right? I do happen to think that people in other Western countries should be concerned about things like citizenship-based taxation and be prepared and maybe at least get on the track towards getting a second passport if they ever decide that they need to renounce for some kind of policy reasons. But even if you're just leaving your country, what a lot of people do right now is if you're an entrepreneur, you'll just say, hey, where do I move? But a lot of other folks who are, for example, stock investors will be like, let me get my infrastructure set up first. And so for people who invest, they'll say, hey, can I get a bank account that has a built-in brokerage or a bank account that allows me to invest? So a place like Singapore, for example. Can I get a residence permit? Can I just get the infrastructure together? And so my suggestion is having at least the infrastructure. If you're not ready to move, we'll still work with you because I think having bank accounts, having brokerage accounts, having a residence permit, having a citizenship, maybe having a property, having stuff overseas is going to get you comfortable. There's no way you're going to renounce citizenship, and potentially there's no way you're going to move out of your country, right? I mean, saving a bunch of money in tax is a strong motivator, but some people just they want to get comfortable that, hey, my money's in that bank in Singapore and it's just as good as the money that's sitting here in my bank where I live now. And so Plan B for many people comes before Plan A. Again, entrepreneurs who are just like, I'm ready to go, they go to Plan A directly, but having the infrastructure set up and feeling comfortable is important. So he mentions Webull and Robinhood. I don't know as much about Webull, but what I do know is things that are designed to be easy for wide adoption are often more difficult. And so I'll hear people talk about Schwab accounts or Fidelity accounts. These are pretty wide adoption accounts and they're widely available and they have good features and it's lower fees and all that. They're more concerned about people living overseas. One example I had last year was Capital One. I had an account going back to when it was ING Direct, back when I was 16 years old. So I had this account for 21 years. And they closed my account. They never tell you exactly why, but I'm like, why would you close my account? I really never, I had a savings account, just was kind of sitting there and why close it? And I had a credit card and with a debit card. And I guess that I probably was overseas too much. And so a bank that is more focused on a wide adoption was more concerned oh my God, he's in Colombia. Even though I would be not really using it that much, I would use it occasionally. And I think that they eventually didn't like that. Whereas American Express, for example, certainly is becoming more mainstream. Certainly seems like they're trying to, bring more people into the fold. But is perceived as this kind of high-level company. They're not really concerned. You talk to expats, yeah, Amex doesn't care. I get a fraud alert on a MasterCard that I have every week. Amex, it never sends me a single thing as I travel around the world. And so in that system, a Robinhood, I think is generally going to be more difficult. Every bank has their own policies. And so if the question is on a U.S. level, if I renounce, there are actually, in some cases, benefits to having a bank account in the United States if you're a non-resident alien. For example, there's generally non-taxation of interest income for non-resident aliens, whereas if you are a U.S. person, U.S. citizen, U.S. green card holder, you have to pay tax on whatever interest income you earn. So there's actually some benefits. The question is, does the bank want to have someone? So for example, former U.S. citizens generally can't go and open online savings accounts. If you're hey, interest rates are going up, I have some cash from my cash flow business, I want to park it somewhere temporarily, hey, why not just put it in this U.S. account where they just pay me interest by the day and I can just take it out whenever I want. You're not going to be able to open those. Now, do you have to close one that you already have? That comes down to a bank policy. I've seen them go both ways, right? And so I don't want to speak for every bank's policies because I don't want the banks to, these banks are really a pain to deal with, quite frankly, when you start giving away their stuff. But I think that you want to ask the bank, hey, are you going to allow me to stay here? I think that a lot of the, again, more wide adoption brokerage accounts in the U.S. want U.S. residents, want U.S. citizens. I'll tell you from my own experience. I called for someone to T. Rowe Price a couple years ago and said, hey, someone has a U.S. Social Security number because they're a former citizen. They can get a U.S. address. But they're not a citizen. Yeah, we're not interested. And I think you probably find a lot of that. What you're looking for is the diversification of being overseas, where you have a place where they know you're offshore. So like some Singapore banks, they have like just an offshore division. So they have the onshore people who live in Singapore, and then they've got a whole like separate part of the bank where it's like different people working there who serve offshore customers, right? And so they're going to let you do investments with them. They're going to let you have a bank account with them. And like, obviously, you're not in Singapore because they know it's like literally the offshore division, right? You don't live in Singapore. That's why they are helping you. And so for brokerage accounts, the more kind of professional level brokerage accounts, like interactive brokers, there's some in Asia you can open up either with Singaporean banks, or there's some in Hong Kong, for example. There's some kind of like app banks in Switzerland where you never lived in the first place, so you can open up with them. Those could all work, like a trading platform where they just don't care. A good professional trading platform, I think, generally speaking, won't care. But again, the more like wide adoption, like, hey, trade on your phone, like during lunchtime, Robinhood, like that's just not going to work as well. And so that could be the case no matter where you live. I think that, getting an account in the United States, if you've never been a U.S. citizen, could be somewhat difficult, but you'd have the same ease of getting an account in Switzerland, Singapore, wherever else, or in the U.S. with a high-level broker. I can tell you we did a project for some folks recently where they're like, hey, I just want to get a financial advisor. I have $10 million to invest. And most financial advisors we talked to in like the U.S. and Canada, the U.K. just didn't want to take them on. Even not part of a bank, not part of a individual kind of wealth planners didn't want to take them on for the KYC. So that's something to keep in mind. On bank accounts, people want to know, can I keep my bank accounts? There's some special considerations for U.S. citizens if you're like renouncing. If you're just keeping your U.S. citizenship, you can have your U.S. bank accounts, and the U.S. is more flexible in that way. If you're coming from another country, again, not giving you tax advice, but some other countries will, it's on their list of things where you have a bank account, that's a strike against you. Does that mean one strike and you're out? Not necessarily. I think in some countries it would be a big issue. Certainly in some countries, remitting money to a bank account there would be an issue, like, oh, you're generating income. So every country has their own policies. Generally speaking, if you're not from the United States, I would suggest that if you're going to become tax non-resident of a country, you don't want to pay taxes there anymore. Banking overseas is not only just a good thing to do, right? You're leaving the country for a reason. You want to be diversified. But I think it's probably better to do that. Now, there could be exceptions for many people who, like, you don't want to sell your house, but you have to rent it out because in many countries you can't have accommodation available to you. So I don't want to sell the property because I think it's going to keep going up in value, which is turning out not to be true these days. Or sentimental reasons, maybe I'll come back in 3 years, whatever. You may be able to have a bank account to collect that rent. There may be some cases where it's better just to have the rent sent to you overseas or have a property manager or something like that. So every country is different. I do know there are people like in Europe, for example, where when you update your status with the bank to non-resident status, they get really squirrely. And so again, like you want to have an infrastructure set up somewhere else where you don't rely on that. If you're from Europe, you can use SEPA, the single euro payments area, to send money to within Europe very easily. Even if you don't have an account, let's say France, you could get an account in Portugal, you're going to get an account in Latvia, you could get an account in wherever, and you could still pay some local bills. If you're living somewhere else, then that becomes a bit more of a challenge. And so the question is more on the banks having an issue for a lot of people. And then as an extra layer, if you're coming from a Western country, your country may not want you to have a bank account, or certainly to continue using it, or certainly to continue remitting money there. Credit cards are often an issue. For Americans, it's again much easier, so there is some benefit to being American. If you're like a miles addict, and I used to be one myself, living in Canada, Australia, yeah, it's going to be harder. It's going to be a strike against you to keep those cards. Does that mean it's the end of the world? No, but I think you want to look at the global structure. People ask, what do I do with my bank accounts and brokerage accounts? Should be asking, how am I restructuring my entire life? Where am I going to live? What's my bank account going to be there? Probably not going to be my biggest bank account, right? Because if I'm living in a place that's good to live, it's probably not the best place to bank. So where's going to be my bigger bank account? Where are my assets going to be? Where's my company going to be? That company has a separate bank account. So you're not looking at the total picture for just, hey, can I keep my bank account? Like, they may not want you to. It may not be a good idea from a tax perspective. And it's just not going to be as convenient, right, in terms of functioning. So Generally speaking, good idea to diversify your banks and be getting out of those. The U.S. being more flexible. Brokerage accounts, the more wide adoption, the more difficult they are. Again, if you got into that account not being, let's say, a U.S. person, then you're probably fine. But if you came in, hey, I'm a U.S. person, you're a U.S. service, and then you decide to renounce your citizenship, yeah, they may have an issue with that. And so that's definitely something you want to handle on a bank-by-bank basis. So always consult the appropriate institutions. Always play it straight, as I say, and if you want help with your process of leaving your country and doing things right, you can certainly learn more about what we do at nomadcapitalist.com.